Well,
Could
I would
be
just say you get rid of elections. That's my solution. Why do you care about elections?
if that happened at the federal level in the United States, that might have an impact potentially on the way in which international institutions are structured, although that was always under theorized by the Sanders left. And there was never really any articulated strategy for transforming the post World War II international system if Sanders had won. And I think that's something that's been really missing. And one of the things that the left has tended to do is to get kind of barbarized by the ways in which it's continuously thwarted by the manifest uncompetitiveness of its policies, and start backing third worldist movements or nationalist movements based around BRICS, or to get absorbed with trying to bring about multipolarity. It seems to me that these are kind of frustrated moves by a left which doesn't really have any kind of realistic strategy for realizing its substantive goals, but nonetheless still is possessed with a desire to bring about these results. And this is, I think, the very specific problem that the post-World War II institutions create. They create these demands for a future that is very ambitious, very demanding, very hard to construct, particularly through the institutions that the post-World War II system makes available. A bunch of nation states with elections that happen on different timelines, influenced by different moments in history, different events that are occurring in different parts of the world. So you can never have a bunch of governments all get elected at the same time who all have a vision for changing the way the global institutions work. So what happens when a nationalist wins or when a social democrat wins in a particular nation state? They try to adopt policies that differ from those of other countries. The policies that they adopt make them uncompetitive. And then as they become uncompetitive, they start to lose out economically. And then even though the population wants to see change and is interested in cultural change, the economic consequences punish the population until the population submits and returns to the previous set of policies. As we saw in Greece, as we've seen to a significant degree in Hungary, in Italy, the leaders who get in charge have to ultimately work with the international system on an economic level to be able to stick around. And then this greatly limits their ability to transform the culture in their particular countries.
Well, so, I mean, when I think of a good example of my future, I think it's something like Lee Kuan Yew. This is sort of a post-nationalist nationalist leader. This is sort of the attitudes that I think leaders are going to have to develop: a human well-being with a respect to the fact that a lot of countries are going to necessarily be multicultural. When you say like a new world or a new order, what are you imagining is going to could fill this gap? Because how is it not going to go through nations? You've got to pull against something. If you're not going to be integrated into the global economy, then there's going to have to be a national economy or a nationalist economy. Even if you're not a nationalist, like I'm not a nationalist, how can the smaller power not be the thing that is used to pull against the larger one?
Well, so I'm thinking about getting outside of the whole post-World War II system and the whole ontology that we've been stuck in since World War II of nation states that are ascribed sovereignty, but have to participate in international institutions that greatly circumscribe what they can do so that this sovereignty is a chimera. And the population is constantly chasing a sovereignty that they can't have so long as they remain within international institutions. At the same time, if nation states try to individually defect, they get heavily punished for individually defecting. And then they're made examples of and become further reasons why you have to conform. So what I'm kind of interested in is whether it might be possible for there to be a transformation at the level of the international system, rather than elect a national government that tries to defect in ways which we've seen time and time again, you don't work. Every time you try these kinds of strategies, you just lose the next election, right?
Well, I would just say you get rid of elections. That's my solution. Why do you care about elections?
Well, the reason you lose the election is because you lose legitimacy.
No, I understand. Elections are just little manipulatable things that power wins elections, money wins elections. Public opinion can be manipulated by the managerial state.
Right. But part of the reason that you have to fight the election, in the first place is because if you don't fight the election, there's a danger in a lot of these countries of there being a coup, of there being a split. The election is a way to try to deal with that legitimation problem. When you have a one-party state, then you don't have the mechanism of the election to let off the steam. I'm thinking here a little bit about
it sounds like elections are bad.
Back in the 40s, Schumpeter made the argument about how you have a competitive multi-party system which allows the public to be fobbed off with the possibility of electing an opposition, and the parties don't have to be substantively different and don't have to promise anything that actually points in any direction. As long as there's multiple parties and they compete, then when you have a legitimation problem, you can replace one of the parties with the other. It blows off some steam, and this allows you to keep going.
I agree with that. Yes, that's one of the control mechanisms of managerialism.
Well, maybe something I could ask to kind of just narrow down where the disagreement might be. So we're in the United States. Dave, let's say the next administration, you're the Steve Bannon of the next administration. You have complete political, you're not the president, but you're advising the president, and you can, put forth an agenda. What would some concrete kind of political moves be, or that you think, the
good
right
governance
towards?
So the problem, though, is the same one that Ben points out. If I were to come in on the administration, the first thing I need to do is to make sure that I never leave. If I just do good governance stuff, like, for instance, there's a lot of things that America just needs that will be electorally unpopular. That, like, for instance, if I decrease immigration or try to attack the financialization of banks, then my ability to borrow money from the international banking system will evaporate, and my entitlement system will evaporate, and this will cause short-term pain. Now, I think in the long term, I can make that work. Or, for instance, I think that we need to reintroduce hard moralism on the population and get them away from consumption and other kind of degenerate activity. Now, this will be highly even though people know they need to do this, even though people know they need to base the meaning of their lives on family and community and less on consumption and these dopamine traps, taking that away from them will be heavily unpopular. So the first thing I would do...
What's an example of hard remoralization? Because Benjamin, I know, has written about virtue. And so I'm curious.
Like low-hanging fruit would just be like, here's a good example, like just legalizing OnlyFans. It's just the lowest hanging fruit ever. It's literally prostitution. It should already be illegal. Or illegalizing sports betting. Like half the population's like addicted to sports betting at this stage. This is low-hanging fruit. I would do much more than just this. But those two things, legalizing those vices, would be heavily unpopular, and except for at the polls. The second thing would be entitlement reform. We have to get the population off its addiction to entitlements. Those entitlements are based on debt, and the debt's controlled by the banks. And that is one of the ways, the entitlements is one of the ways, this is what leftists miss, is one of the ways that banks control the sovereignty of any kind of individual government that comes in play. Governments need to borrow money. And if the credit of that government is in question by, say, not pursuing a constant expansion of the population or trade, then the ability to borrow money against that system is going to be called into question.
Okay.